All right, hello, Honors 110. Today we are officially launching into our first formal unit for the class, Unit 1, Education. And with that, we have this reading by Mark Salzman, an excerpt from his book, True Notebooks. As I mentioned earlier on in the video lectures, there will be an essay attached to each of the units. And so please do make sure that you're doing the readings, keeping up with them, but also taking some notes for yourself or making note of even things in the class discussion that you may want to revisit in those essays down the road. So with that, let me go ahead and dive right into the text itself here and some of the surrounding concepts from it. The first kind of bigger picture question that I want to raise for the class is, this is a reading that's set in a juvenile detention center and Mark Salzman teaching these students. And so the question I want to kind of pose is, why do detention centers, prisons, any kind of facilities like this even exist? What's the motivation behind them? Because I think that is deceptively multifactored with a lot of kind of well-intentioned kind of purposes, but also some that may arguably not be so much in that vein. And with that, what's the role of, or how does education fit into that scheme? We conceptualize, why we would have a detention center. What's the role of having a writing class like the one that Salzman ultimately teaches? How does that sort of fit in there? With that, going into the actual text, we open on this scene of Salzman interacting with these students, to use a kind of literary term, an en medias res, which means that we're kind of in the middle of things, the way that this is framed. And so I did want to pose that as a question as well. We get the whole chapter 1 where we have Salzman clearly already having established a relationship with his students. And then we back up in chapter 2 to a time when not only is he not yet teaching these students, he's reluctant to even visit the class that his friend is teaching in this detention center. And if we look ahead to, this is page 9 in the printed book. This is the second part of the fourth page of the PDF. We have this reasons not to visit Dwayne's writing class in juvenile hall, and then reasons to visit Dwayne's class at juvenile hall, and then more reasons not to visit Dwayne's class. And the reasons not to lists are significantly longer than the reasons to visit, and the reasons to visit are pretty shallow in nature. This is page 10 of the printed pages, page 5 of the PDF, where Salzman writes, reasons to visit are have never seen the inside of a jail and pretended to be enthusiastic when Dwayne mentioned it. These are not the most kind of, noble reasons to want to be involved in something like this. So I'm just curious about our reactions to this setup that we start in the middle of things, we back up to when Salzman has never worked with this population and is clearly, very reluctant to do so. And then by chapter 3, when we get to, the 7th page of the PDF, page 14 by the printed pages, we get to him actually, starting to teach this class. And so with all this, it's clearly out of order. The most traditional way to tell a story is just, straight up chronological order. This happened, and this happened. What choices do we think Salzman's making here? Why would he put things in these orders? How do we understand it? Did everyone understand it? I sometimes have students who didn't follow that was the order at all and were just kind of confused by his kind of changing personality over the course of these things. I'm really interested in just kind of reactions to all of that. But okay, to carry on here though, going back to the very beginning of this piece, that first exchange that we see between Salzman and his students, he was talking about, what waited over the weekend and going to a wedding, but this whole conversation of Mr. Rogers comes up. And so Mr. Rogers, I realize it's starting to become a pretty dated reference, but he did, host a children's show that aired on PBS. It was, pretty popular. Rogers, to my knowledge, is one of those rare kind of celebrity figures who never had a fall from grace, was very well respected, generally a good person. And yet we have the students kind of talking about the show itself and talking about all of the parts they find unrealistic about it. And, they say things like, I'm going to quote from, this is the start of page 4 in the printed pages, the second page of the PDF. Yeah, Toa said, but check it out. That show be fake. Know how I figured it out? People always be walking in and out of his door and he never locked it. He'd had all his, excuse my language, shit jacked if it was real. Yeah, homies be like, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Now give me that train set, fool. This whole kind of exchange, I think it's a very conscious choice that Salzman is kind of starting us here. And so I'm just curious as to kind of our reactions. Why do we think we start here? Was this show about the boys he's working with and kind of their reactions to what I think most people would consider a pretty harmless children's show? To carry on here, another specific spot I was going to go to, this is printed page 15. This is the 7th page of the PDF. But so it's this line here where, let's see, it's the first full paragraph. Okay, so yeah, maybe let me just read that paragraph. Dwayne showed up on time and crossed the parking lot with a knapsack slung over his shoulder. As we shook hands, the alarm went off over the metal doors again. The concrete monster opened its mouth and spat the police cruiser out. The boy was gone. He, I presume, needed to be digested for a while before being shit into the adult prison system or puked back out onto the streets. This depiction of the detention center system, the prison system, it's a very specific kind of point of view here, right? I'm curious what sense we make of kind of Salzman's understanding as he demonstrates it here. And so I'm going to outwardly kind of give some sense of where I fall on this, of just that it's certainly not a complementary perception, right? But what he's kind of saying and using these kind of eating and digesting and puking kind of metaphors to apply to it. But okay, and then the last part I'm going to kind of reference more explicitly here is just the very last part of what I've given you, this free write on clouds. And I'm not going to reread the whole thing here, but I'm just going to kind of signal this part of it because I think that Salzman is strategic in positioning it here and kind of featuring this part of it, the student's writing. And it's not that it's a literary masterpiece. There are some grammatical errors in there and some clunky phrasings that could probably be improved upon. But nonetheless, I've taught this essay or this excerpt from this larger work quite a few times. And inevitably, a high volume of students say this was the part that they were most drawn to, were most interested in. So I'm just curious as to sort of reactions to that, what we kind of make of Salzman's choice to end here, what we think of Rubin's reflections about clouds themselves, maybe your own thoughts on kind of clouds, if this kind of brings stuff up for anybody. And then just kind of a parting thought here. I did want to just kind of frame why we're kind of starting here with the text. And so in our next couple of classes, we're going to read some much more traditional kind of material about kind of education on a more historical or philosophical kind of level. This one is a little bit more kind of narrative and outside the box. The reason I want to kind of start here is largely to kind of disarm our preconceived notions about education. I say we're going to do a unit on education, and I think most folks kind of come in with whatever their experience was, but your experience here at UNLV here to date. Many of you, I assume, are going through relatively traditional high school experiences before that. Maybe some folks were homeschooled or in other kind of special programs or things like that. But we tend to be kind of pigeonholed into these very specific lenses on what education looks like. So I want to start here in large part because I think that Salzman's work kind of breaks down what we think of when we think of education in reframing it in this non-traditional setting, in a class that doesn't necessarily have grades, where really the intention is learning more or less for learning's sake. So anyway, I want to just have that in the back of your mind. You'll be thinking about that and all the other kind of questions I raised. As always will be the case in our discussion, again, please feel free to respond to the questions I directly brought up. Please feel free to also shoot off in your own directions if there's other parts of the text that sort of interested you, that you want to kind of call our attention to or reflect on. Or alternatively, if you have just kind of broader kind of questions about the text that you're kind of interested in or didn't quite make sense to you, either you want my opinion as your professor, or probably even more beneficial, just questions you want to kind of pose as food for thought to the rest of the class. All right, thank you as always for watching, and I'll look forward to our discussion.